Okay, so in the last video, we were converting from rectangular to polar and polar to rectangular for the ordered pairs. In this video, we're going to be converting equations. Okay, so for example, we might be given this equation in Algebra 2, y squared equals 2x, and we said graph this. Okay, and so then we would know, we know how to graph this. Okay, these are also equations. Okay, we're going to learn how to graph these on our next lesson, but for now we're going to talk about how do we convert them. So what would this equivalent be in the rectangular form? Okay, so we're going to have to use our formulas again to help us convert. Okay, so in this first problem we've got r equals sine of theta. Okay, well we know that if I had an extra r in front of the sine, right, which I don't have, then I could replace all of this with y. So my first step here is I'm going to multiply by r on each side, right? Because if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. So on this side, I have r squared. And on this side, I then have r times sine of theta. Well, we know that r times sine of theta is the same thing as y. So I can replace that whole thing with y. Okay, we also know that if r is equal to the square root of x squared plus y squared, then we could also say that r squared is equal to x squared plus y squared without the square root. So if we have r squared here, I can replace that with x squared plus y squared. Okay, now you just kind of have to pay attention on Math Excel on how does it want you to write it. So it might stop here. If that's the case, it's multiple choice. Click that problem. If not, then we're going to subtract this over and we're going to make it equal to 0. Okay, so that might be an option. Okay, it might also ask you to complete the square and make this go a little bit further, and we're going to talk about how we do that. So if we wanted to complete the square, notice in this problem I have an x squared, but I don't have an x. So x squared is just going to stay how it is. I do, however, have a y squared and a y. So because we have both of those, we're going to complete the square by adding an extra line here. If I add something to this side of the equation, then I also have to add something to this equation, right? So if I'm going to add something here, then I need to add it here so that it can stay balanced. So in order to do that, in order to find the blank, we're going to take the number in front of the y, which in this case is 1. We're going to divide it by 2 and square it. So 1 divided by 2 squared would give us 1 over 4. Now this then is what we call a perfect square trinomial. Okay, if we were to factor this, if I gave you this and I said factor, you would ask yourself what multiplies to 1/4 and adds to -1? Well, 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. And 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1, right? So if I did -1/2 times -1/2, I would get +1/4. And if I did -1/2 plus -1/2, I would get -1. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So we could write that as y minus 1/2 squared, because -1/2 times -1/2 is a positive, -1/2 plus -1/2 is a -1. Equals 0 plus 1/2, which is 1/2, or 1/4. Sorry, I don't know why I said 1/2. 0 plus 1/4 equals 1/4. And this is as far as we could take it. So in Math Excel, if it's a multiple choice and you see this, click that. If you see this, click that. If you don't, you might have to go further and get to this step. Now, what is this? Well, in geometry, we learned that this is the equation of a circle, where the center is at the ordered pair. Well, there's nothing with the x, so 0. And then the opposite of -1/2 would be +1/2. So it has a center at 0, 1/2, and it has a radius of the square root of 1/4, which is 1/2. So if I asked you to graph this, essentially what we would do is we would go over to 0, 1/2. So if that's a half, this is 1, let's say. And then it has a radius of 1/2, so it goes 1/2 in each direction, and we would have a circle. Okay, geometry. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with number 6. We're going to multiply by r on each side. So we have r squared equals 4r cosine theta. Now r squared is the same thing as x squared plus y squared. And r cosine theta is the same thing as x. Okay, let's move this 4x to the other side. So we have x squared minus 4x plus y squared equals 0. If it doesn't say to go all the way to complete the square, then you could stop here. If it does say to complete the square, then you would need to continue. I'm going to pretend that the directions say to continue so that we can get more practice with completing the square. So if we're going to complete the square, I'm going to have to add a blank because I have an x squared and an x. However, with the y squared, I don't have a y, so I'm just going to leave it alone. And then I've got 0, but if I add a blank here, I have to add a blank here, right, to keep the equation equal. Okay, I can't add something to one side and not to the other. To get what's in the blank, we take the x number, so 4, we divide it by 2 and square it. Always, 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 always divide it by 2 and square it. So 4 divided by 2 would be 2, and 2 squared would give us 4. Now this is a perfect square trinomial. 2 times 2 gives us 4, 2 plus 2 gives us 4. But if I want it to be a negative 4, then I would have to do negative 2. So negative 2 times negative 2 would give us a positive, and negative 2 and negative 2 would give us 4. So x minus 2 squared, the y squared stays by itself. 0 plus 4 is 4. So once again, this would be a circle with a center at opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. There's nothing with the y. And the radius is, I don't know why I wrote that, is the square root of 4, which is 2. So once again, I would go 2 up or down 0, has a radius of 2, we have our circle. I just realized I did this wrong. I don't know what I was thinking. 0 1/2 is up. So it would look more like this. Sorry, I don't know what I was thinking here. This one would be 2, 0, so we would go over 2. That would be the center. And then we've got to go 2 up, down, and around. Okay, so that's all been going from polar to rectangular. So now let's do the other way. So now we're going to do rectangular to polar. Okay, well, we have y squared is equal to 2x. Well, we know y is the same thing as r sine theta, right? Y is equal to r sine theta. So I can replace y here with r sine of theta, but this is y squared, so that means I'm squaring this whole thing, is equal to 2 times x, and we know x is r cosine theta. So if I'm squaring this whole thing, I've got r squared, which would be r squared, and then sine squared, which would be sine squared theta. It's equal to 2r cosine theta. Okay, well, we always like to have r by itself here, so next we're going to divide by r on each side, so we can get some of our r's to the same side here. So if I divide by r squared divided by r is r, so we've got r sine squared equals 2 cosine theta. And then, like I said, we want r to be by itself, so now I'm going to move sine squared over to the other side. So we have r equals 2 cosine theta over sine squared theta. Now, once again, on Math Excel, these are going to be multiple choice. If you see this answer, awesome, click it. If you don't see that answer, remember that if sine squared is on the bottom, can't we turn that into cosecant squared? So technically speaking, we could also say this is 2 cosine theta times cosecant squared theta, and then we wouldn't have a fraction. Okay, so both of these would not be an option. You just have to pick which one is. Okay. All right, number 8. So we've got x squared plus y squared. Well, we know that's equal to r squared. And we know x is equal to r cosine theta. Once again, we could divide by r. That gives us r equals cosine theta. R is by itself. So we're done. Pause this one and try it on your own. Okay, so we know x is r cosine theta. We know y is r sine theta. R times r would give us r squared. We have r squared, so 4r squared cosine theta sine theta. If I want to get r by itself, I'm going to have to divide by 4 cosine and sine. So we have r squared equals. Now once again, we could leave it like this, or we could write it with its reciprocal functions. So we would have 9 over 4. Cosine on the bottom would turn into secant. Sine on the bottom would turn to cosecant. Once again, kind of depends on how far Math Excel wants you to take it. You could leave it like this, or if you don't want to square here, then we would square root each side of this, and we would get our final answer that way. Okay, so it kind of just all depends on how far it wants you to take it. For me, I always just want you to get r by itself. So when it comes to the quiz and the test, you just always want to get r by itself.